On May 24th, 1487, a man walked into Westminster Abbey and was crowned King of England. But here's the problem. Nobody knew who he really was. Even today, over 500 years later, historians can't agree whether England crowned its rightful king or the greatest impostor in royal history. This is the story of Lambert Simnel, the boy who might have been a baker's son, a prince, or something far more complex. And it's about to change everything you think you know about medieval power. The story begins 2 years earlier with one of the most controversial events in English history. King Richard III had just taken the throne, but two young princes stood between him and legitimate rule. Edward V, the rightful king, and his younger brother, Richard, Duke of York. Both boys were heirs with stronger claims to the throne than Richard himself. The princes were placed in the Tower of London for their protection, and then they vanished completely. No bodies were ever found. No witnesses came forward. No official explanation was ever given. The two most important children in England had simply disappeared without a trace. Richard III claimed they had passed away from illness, but he could produce no evidence. His enemies claimed he had eliminated them to secure his throne. The truth died with Richard himself at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, where Henry Tudor defeated him and became Henry VII. But Henry Tudor had a problem. His claim to the throne was incredibly weak. He was descended from an illegitimate line and had spent most of his life in exile. If either of the missing princes was still alive, they would have a much stronger claim to rule England than Henry himself. That's when Lambert Simnel appeared in 1486. A boy of about 10 years old emerged in Ireland, claiming to be Edward Plantagenet, Earl of Warwick. This was explosive news because Edward of Warwick was the nephew of Richard III and had a legitimate claim to the English throne. If this boy really was Edward of Warwick, Henry Tudor was ruling illegally. But here's where the story gets complicated. The real Edward of Warwick was supposedly imprisoned in the Tower of London by Henry VII. Henry claimed he was keeping Edward secure for his own protection, but critics argued he was holding a potential rival prisoner. So, who was this boy in Ireland? And why did so many powerful people believe he was genuine? The boy had been discovered by a priest named Richard Simon in Oxford. Simon claimed he had recognized the child's noble bearing and had helped him escape from Henry's agents. The boy knew details about court life that only a genuine prince would know. He spoke with a refined accent of nobility. Most convincingly, he bore a strong physical resemblance to the Plantagenet royal family. Irish nobles were immediately convinced. Gerald Fitzgerald, the Earl of Kildare, and the most powerful man in Ireland, examined the boy personally and declared him to be the genuine Edward of Warwick. Other Irish lords agreed. Within months, they were planning to restore him to his rightful throne. But support for the boy extended far beyond Ireland. Margaret of Burgundy, sister of the late King Edward IV, publicly recognized him as her nephew. Grey was one of the most respected figures in European nobility, and her endorsement carried enormous weight. She provided funding, military advisors, and political support for the boy's claim. Even more surprisingly, some English nobles began secretly supporting the boy. They remembered the chaos of Henry Tudor's rise to power and questioned whether England was being ruled by its rightful king. Messages were smuggled across the Irish Sea, promising that if the boy could prove his identity, he would find allies in England itself. Henry VII was facing the greatest crisis of his reign. To prove the Irish boy was an impostor, Henry did something unprecedented. He brought the real Edward of Warwick out of the Tower of London and paraded him through the streets of London. The real Edward was clearly a different person from the boy in Ireland. He was older, taller, and looked nothing like the child claiming to be him. Henry's supporters declared this proof that the Irish boy was a fraud. But Henry's enemies argued something far more sinister. They claimed Henry had substituted a different prisoner, and that the real Edward of Warwick was indeed the boy in Ireland. The confusion was deliberate. Henry wanted people to doubt the Irish boy's identity, but his enemies wanted people to doubt Henry's honesty. In the middle of this propaganda war, the truth became impossible to determine. Meanwhile, the boy in Ireland was receiving royal treatment. He was given a household befitting a prince, tutored in statecraft and military strategy, and presented at ceremonies as the rightful king of England. Irish chroniclers recorded that he displayed natural leadership abilities and seemed comfortable. With royal protocol, foreign observers were divided. Some reported that the boy seemed genuinely noble-born and couldn't possibly be an impostor. Others suggested he had been carefully trained to play his role. A few hinted at an even more complex possibility that the boy might be genuine nobility, but not the specific person he claimed to be. In 1487, the situation escalated dramatically. With Margaret of Burgundy's support, an invasion force was assembled to place the boy on the English throne. Irish troops, German mercenaries, and English exiles gathered in Ireland, preparing to sail for England and challenge Henry Tudor directly. The boy was formally crowned as Edward VI in Dublin Cathedral on May 24th, 1487. The ceremony was conducted with full royal protocol, attended by Irish nobles, foreign ambassadors, and English exiles. For one brief moment, England had two kings, Henry Tudor in London and this mysterious boy in Dublin. The invasion force landed in England in June 1487. The boy, now calling himself King Edward VI, led his army toward London, expecting English nobles to rally to his cause. But the response was disappointing. Most English lords remained loyal to Henry Tudor, whether from genuine conviction or fear of backing the losing side. At the Battle of Stoke Field on June 16, 1487, Henry Tudor's forces defeated the boy's army decisively. The boy was captured alive, along with his supporters. The rebellion was over. But the mystery was just beginning. Henry Tudor now had the boy in his custody, and everyone expected him to reveal the impostor's true identity. But Henry's treatment of his prisoner was baffling. Instead of executing the boy as a traitor, Henry claimed he was Lambert Simnel, the son of a baker from Oxford. He said the boy had been manipulated by ambitious adults and deserved mercy rather than punishment. Henry gave Lambert Simnel a job in the royal kitchens and later promoted him to falconer. He lived the rest of his life as a minor court servant, dying peacefully in 1525. But Henry never produced the supposed baker who was Lambert's father, never explained how a common boy had learned noble mannerisms, and never accounted for the physical resemblance to the Plantagenet family. Henry's enemies immediately declared this proof of a cover-up. They argued that Henry couldn't execute the boy because he really was noble-born, possibly even the genuine Edward of Warwick. Killing a legitimate prince would have been politically disastrous and morally unacceptable, even for Henry Tudor. But Henry's supporters offered a different explanation. They claimed Henry was showing remarkable mercy by sparing a manipulated child. They argued that executing Lambert would have made Henry look cruel and insecure, while keeping him alive demonstrated confidence in his own legitimacy. Modern historians have proposed dozens of theories about Lambert Simnel's true identity. Some believe he really was a baker's son who was trained to impersonate royalty. Others argue he was a minor noble who bore a coincidental resemblance to the Plantagenets. A few suggest he might have been an illegitimate member of the royal family, making his claim partially valid. The most intriguing theory is that Lambert Simnel was exactly who he claimed to be, Edward Plantagenet, Earl of Warwick. This theory suggests that Henry Tudor had substituted a different boy in the Tower of London, and that the real Edward had escaped to Ireland. It would explain the Irish noble's conviction, Margaret of Burgundy's support, and Henry's reluctance to execute his prisoner. But there's an even more complex possibility. Some historians suggest that the confusion was intentional, orchestrated by Margaret of Burgundy to destabilize Henry Tudor's reign. According to this theory, Margaret didn't care whether the boy was genuine or not. She simply wanted to create enough doubt about Henry's legitimacy to weaken his position. DNA analysis could potentially solve the mystery. But Lambert Simnel's burial site is unknown, and the remains of the real Edward of Warwick have never been identified. The physical evidence that could definitively answer the question has been lost to time. What we do know is that the Lambert Simnel affair exposed the fundamental weakness of medieval kingship. Royal legitimacy depended on bloodline, but bloodlines could be disputed, hidden, or fabricated. In an age before reliable documentation or forensic science, identity was ultimately a matter of belief rather than proof. The mystery of Lambert Simnel also reveals how political power operated in medieval Europe. Support for the boy came not from conviction about his identity, but from dissatisfaction with Henry Tudor's rule. Irish nobles, European rivals, and English malcontents used the boy's claim as a weapon against a king they opposed for other reasons. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the story is how Henry Tudor handled it. Instead of creating a martyr by executing Lambert Simnel, Henry neutralized the threat by treating him as insignificant. By giving the boy a humble position at court, Henry demonstrated that he wasn't afraid of rivals and didn't need to resort to violence to maintain power. But Henry's solution created its own mystery. If Lambert really was an impostor, why show him such unusual mercy? If he really was a legitimate claimant, why risk keeping him alive? Henry's decision makes sense only if Lambert's true identity was so complex or controversial that revealing it would have been more dangerous than concealing it. Today, Lambert Simnel remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. Was he a baker's son manipulated by ambitious adults? A minor noble caught up in political games? The genuine Earl of Warwick fighting for his rightful inheritance? Or something else entirely? The answer died with the people who knew the truth. But the question remains as fascinating today as it was 500 years ago, when power depends on identity, and identity can be constructed. Who decides what makes a king legitimate? Lambert Simnel's coronation in Dublin Cathedral was either the crowning of England's rightful king or the greatest royal fraud in medieval history. We may never know which, but perhaps that's the point. In the end, the mystery of Lambert Simnel reminds us that history itself is often a matter of belief, interpretation, and the stories we choose to accept as true.